welcome to All Things Green. I'm Shelby, here with my co-host Anton to discuss a variety of topics from across the sustainability universe. Anton, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Shelby?
I'm doing really well. I'm enjoying the spring, although I have to admit it's got my allergies running a little bit.
Yeah.
So excuse any, phlegminess you might hear from me today.
Yeah.
But with spring also comes all of the blooms. And last week, or really over the weekend on Earth Day, we talked about your garden and all of your native plants. So
Yes, we did.
Curious if anything is blooming these days.
Well, I don't have a whole lot of blooms right now. I do have a leafing out persimmon tree, 2 of them actually in my front yard. So I'm excited about that. This is my first spring spending time with them. So it's going to be really fun to see them continue to grow this year.
And
Also,
you'll bring in some persimmons for us eventually?
Yes. Yeah, they'll probably be ripe around like November or December of 2025.
Okay, we have a little bit of time to wait then. Anything else
Yeah.
going on in your backyard or your neighborhood?
Well, we have a cottonwood tree in my backyard, and that's like a huge, like over 100 years old, like huge dinosaur tree. It's finally leafing out, but it's really messy, so I got to clean those gutters again. Yeah.
Which is important because, as we learned in our last episode, those gutters help
Yes.
you collect all that rainwater that then flows into your
Yeah.
native plants, aerates
Yes.
the soil. It's a whole thing.
Yes, but worst of all, we have the Cleveland pear, also known as the calorie pear, blooming. This is an invasive plant that spreads like wildfire. You're going to see this a lot in urban areas. It has this really beautiful white ornamental flower, but I don't know if you could smell it, but it smells terrible, like bodily fluids.
I can smell it from here. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
For anyone who can't actually see and is just listening, Anton is attempting to put some sort of twig into my face.
Yeah.
I guess it's a calorie pear tree twig, yes?
Yeah, I just ripped it off the street earlier today, and I didn't feel bad about it because it's invasive, so that's that.
Well, it's beautiful. Invasive, bad. Smell, bad. But,
Yeah.
I mean, it is kind of a looker, so
It
I'll
is a
take
looker.
it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for giving us the update on your backyard. Can I
Absolutely.
bring the mood down just a little bit?
I guess sometimes we got to do that in this circle.
I know. Well, we're covering things across the sustainability universe, and some of
Yes.
that is cool things growing in your backyard, and some of it is misinformation. So let's get into our first story today. Our story comes from the news source EcoWatch,
Okay.
and I want to talk a little bit about how we discuss climate change in textbooks. How's that sound to you?
Okay. I'm intrigued where this is going.
Yeah, so I guess I want to start by just framing this up with our experiences. So tell me a little bit about your experiences in school, whether you learned about climate change or global warming.
Yeah, so I remember like right around 7th grade science, I remember learning a lot about like global warming. I think it was framed as like
Yeah.
the earth is warming, but like don't worry, we have these renewable energies that are gonna save us and it's all fine.
Yeah, I think my experience was similar. Like I
Yeah.
remember learning about acid rain,
Oh yeah,
Being-
that's a fun one.
like a little bit freaked out about it, but then going home and talking about it at home, and it was like, well, I've never seen that, so it wasn't framed as something that I needed to do anything about, or really, as far as I remember, this like human caused problem.
Yeah.
And we even used the term global warming. I heard that a lot more when I was in middle and high school than I do now. I think we talk a lot more about climate change now.
Yeah.
Do you notice the same thing?
Yeah, that kind of made its way into the conversation, the phrase climate change. I feel like I referred to it as global warming for a really long time. Honestly, I think I was maybe 19 or 20 years old when global warming was phased out for climate change.
Yeah, and it is like more all-inclusive because climate change is based on more than just global warming.
Yeah,
but of course,
exactly.
that's a huge issue. Well, let's talk a little bit about the particular story that we're referencing
Please.
here. So in the state of Texas, which for anyone who doesn't know, Texas is actually where I lived prior to Ohio. I was in Austin, Texas for 5 years. So I loved living in the state of Texas, but I'm not a fan of this move. In February of this year, the Texas State Board of Education voted to change its guidelines, and I'm going to quote this to get it exactly right,
Okay.
to emphasize the positive aspects of fossil fuels in science
my.
textbooks.
Oh my.
Yeah, positive take on fossil fuels. What's your immediate reaction
Well, I
to
just
that?
want to pause there. Like, are these textbooks rooted in fact or evidence? I mean, I'm sure that they still talk about climate change a little bit, right? But are they trying to like play both sides a little bit here?
They are trying to play both sides. So they're saying that essentially you should be able to get two opinions because this is something that's based on opinion.
Yeah.
Of course it's not. 99% of climate scientists agree that humans are the cause of the level of global warming and
100%.
climate change that we're seeing. But the State Board of Education in Texas says global warming is part of natural fluctuations. And this just isn't based in evidence. This is based in money. And the board says it itself. They say, well, how can we not show the positive aspects of fossil fuels when fossil fuels fund our schools?
Yeah, that's scary. And I think even the politicians, the elected members of the State Board of Education, there's probably contributions going to their campaign as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I would assume so. We'd have to look a little deeper to know for sure or to what level. But yeah, that's the narrative even they are saying is, well, our schools rely on the funding that fossil fuels bring to the state of Texas. Texas is the #1 producer of energy in the U.S. They're actually also the #1 producer of green energy in the U.S.
Wow.
Yeah. Did you see that coming if I would have asked you like who you thought was #1?
I wouldn't have guessed Texas.
I probably wouldn't have either, but if you think about the geography of Texas, it makes sense. And that's a whole other story that we could talk about. But they have this vested interest in thinking about energy. And it brings me back to this session that I sat in on when I went to the last annual conference for the American Public Health Association.
Yeah.
Shout out APHA. You know I'm a public health professional.
Yes.
I love that conference. And I went to a session that was actually about how we market, how media portrays different scientific ideas that have scientific consensus behind them.
Yeah.
So they used climate change as an example of something that for decades, media tried to show both sides of, but really this isn't a two-sided issue. There is the fact that humans are causing climate change,
right.
And then there are reasons that people don't want to talk about that, or reasons that they prioritize the industries that create the carbon emissions over the idea of prioritizing what's best for our planet. That's the real other side of it. The session I went to was talking about how more and more in the media we are seeing a more aligned take on climate change that's not attempting to show another side, but that we are starting to see the same sort of media bias when we talk about things like food waste or about eating plant-based. So just as an example, we know that eating more fruits and vegetables, eating more plant-based is good for you. There is scientific consensus on that, but there is this tendency in the media to show both sides and say, well, you can be healthy on a meat-containing diet. Yeah, of course you can be, but the point of the science is that encouraging more fruits and vegetables is objectively better.
Yes, 100%. And I see the correlation that you're talking about with that in the oil and gas industry. And I feel like people also will kind of understand that a lot of this is money driven. Like you were saying, it was money driven by the oil and gas industry. There's definitely a big factory farming incentive for people to market that in the media as well.
Exactly. And one other thing I want to say about this is just that Texas is such a big player in the textbook market. They make up about 10% of the national textbook market.
Like they make textbooks there?
They are purchasers of about 10% of that.
Oh, wow, okay.
So if you think about someone who's creating a product, whether it's a shoe or a textbook, you want something that's going to appeal to a lot of people. So if 10% of your market is requiring that you have to show fossil fuels in a positive light, that might impact the way that textbook manufacturers put out content, because they don't want to isolate that 10% of their market and create a separate textbook for Florida or Ohio or Tennessee. Wow. So we could see ripple effects from the policy changes in Texas across the larger U.S. market.
That's wild. How much sway Texas has just based on like population, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Like just that political clout in their State Board of Education might influence what a student in Ohio is learning about.
Yes, absolutely. So sorry to bring us down to earth, but I just thought it was really important that we talk about it, and then remind our audience that there are real scientific-based, evidence-based reasons to support the idea that humans are creating climate change as it's happening. And
100%.
Yeah, we shouldn't be talking about an other side when we're talking about the science.
Yeah, Exactly. Got to stick to the facts.
Stick to the facts, yeah.
Yeah.
What else do you have for us today?
Well, I got something. I wouldn't say it's the happiest story either, but, I wanted to talk about something crazy that's going on in Ohio. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard about it, but there is a huge activist-led campaign right now to keep fracking out of Ohio's state parks. Have you heard anything about this?
Only mildly. Why are we having to fight against having fracking in state parks?
Yeah. Well, let me give you some context so that you can understand this issue. It's really complicated. In 2011, John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, he signed into law a bill that would allow the fracking in state parks.
Oh,
And
so this has been going on for 12 years,
well,
13 years?
You would think, like, he signed in this law, and why isn't there fracking in state parks? Well, there was actually such a big public outcry against this that John Kasich kind of just backed off. He didn't name anybody to the Oil and Gas Land Management Commission that the statute created. And that's the body that I'm going to be referring to. It's an administrative body that effectively will self-regulate and allow the oil and gas industry to lease land from public lands.
Yeah, who's on that board?
Well, it's a little bit sad. DeWine
is...
Governor
yeah.
DeWine, sorry for our non-Ohio listeners. Governor DeWine, he actually named 4 people to the board, and by statute, it has to be 2 oil and gas lawyers. One of them is a financial sector person. They aren't necessarily representing oil and gas, but we found him to not be too friendly towards the activists against his cause either. And then lastly, a park representative who, just to be honest, he's a total sellout. Like, he's just willing to send our lands to be fracked.
Yeah. Tell me more about why this is a big deal. Like, what should my takeaway be from this? What does fracking look like in terms of the impact on the community?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's very anti-democratic. We being Buckeye Environmental Network and activists that are working on the Public Lands campaign, over 1,000 written comments from community members, over 30 in-person testimonies at these very niche hearings at the Oil and Gas Land Management Commission, just speaking in-person testimony. They haven't taken any of our testimony into consideration, but they, at the snap of a fingers, were willing to change their rules to accommodate the oil and gas industry better. So I think people should be outraged that their voices aren't being heard or taken into account. And a lot of their fears are based on health. What is this going to have on my health? What impact is this going to have on my health?
Yeah, that's the main question I have is just what's that impact? I mean, what's the evidence say about the impact of having fracking nearby?
Yeah, and a lot of it, we know for a fact, studies show that it raises your risk of cancer. It will do things like increase the rate of premature births, liver damage, stuff like that. So it's really bad stuff. It's air pollution, it's water pollution, it's all kinds of things, just being adjacent to these dirty industries.
That makes sense to me. For anyone who doesn't really know, like, what does fracking look like? Like, why is it creating that kind of emissions or outcomes?
Yeah, so for people who don't know what fracking is kind of like a little bit of a euphemism for taking a bunch of clean, fresh water, mixing it with a slew of toxic and radioactive chemicals, shooting it down into the earth at high pressures to get to the oil. Once you've fractured the earth, a lot of that slew of chemicals is going to leak into people's drinking wells over 1,000 feet away over and the runoff from this industry also is going to end up in our waterways. And this is all self-regulated as well. The Oil and Land Management Commission is going to be very friendly to the oil and gas industry.
That sounds right to me. Do you know if anything has happened yet? Like, has fracking started in state parks?
It hasn't started just yet. The Oil and Gas Land Management Commission, I should maybe just refer to it as the commission.
Sure.
The commission is in the process of accepting permitting agreements from oil and gas industries, and we actually have a public records request from ODNR, Ohio Division of Natural Resources. An oil and gas industry wants to put 15 fracking rigs on Salt Fork. And to give you an idea of it, 17,000 acres is how big Salt Fork is. That's almost 1,000 acres per fracking rig. So, I mean, there's a lot of land on Salt Fork, but there's also a lot of chemicals now in Salt Fork as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm going to venture a guess that maybe the state parks that are going to see more of this fracking are not the state parks that are in the areas where people have more power in their deeper pockets to push back against that. Is that an off-base assumption?
It's not an off-base assumption. And honestly, I fear that the industry is so powerful that we're going to see this not only in our state parks, the statute is saying explicitly state lands. So, I mean, this can happen on a wildlife management area where people might go hunting or fishing or foraging. This might happen on a college campus.
A college campus.
Yeah. I mean, literally, you can put a rig on Kent State's campus, and kids would just be exposed to that on a daily basis.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Well, I'm wishing your organization luck. I hope you can keep us updated on the story as you see any progress, hopefully positive progress. Yeah, keep us up to date.
Of course, and I just wanted to shout out my close coworker, Kathy Cowan-Becker. She's really taking the lead on this campaign. She was involved before she even started working for Buckeye Environmental Network, and she's going to see this through to the end. So looking forward to hearing more from her and getting more updates from her.
I love that. I love shouting out folks who are on the front lines who are really doing the work. So I'm glad you brought that to our attention. Let's shift to something that's maybe a little bit more fun.
Okay, let's do it.
I want to ask you about your diet.
Okay.
Because I just want to be more like you, Anton.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. Tell me, do you stick to any particular like dietary guidelines or like a particular diet of any kind?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I've been trying to eat more salads since I started the podcast. Now that I'm going to be on video and on the airwaves, like I want to slim down a little bit. So I've been eating a lot of veggies.
That's good.
Maybe a little bit less meat.
Okay.
But honestly, as a Croatian, which for people who don't know where Croatia is, it's across the Adriatic Sea from Italy in the Balkan Peninsula. We eat a lot of pork. We just eat a lot of meat. We're carnivores.
Yeah. So you eat everything. You don't have any like rules.
No rules.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk to you a little bit about this. I'm not going to try to change your mind or anything. I just wanted to get like a baseline of where you are.
And I'm open to hear it.
Yeah. I was reading through a couple of different articles. Sources include Inside Climate News and also the Washington Post. And they were reporting on the Paris Agreement.
Okay.
Yeah, the Paris Agreement. And looking at the idea of will we be able to hit the goals that were set in the Paris Agreement. And ultimately, researchers are saying there's no way we're going to be able to reach those goals of cutting carbon emissions and cutting greenhouse gases if we don't cut methane emissions. And methane emissions are primarily coming from the meat and dairy industries.
Meat and dairy.
Yes. So
emphasis on the dairy, or
I wouldn't say emphasis over meat. So let's look at some of the data here.
Yeah.
So according to the research, food systems alone will contribute up to 1 degree Celsius of warming by 2100, not helping us towards our goals of reducing planet warming.
Yeah.
Methane comes about 42% from the meat industry.
Wow.
Interestingly, 23% from the rice industry. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Yes.
And then 19% from dairy. So really, really heavy on meat, but still significant amounts coming out of these other industries.
Yeah.
I don't know how that strikes you, knowing that, I also eat without any kind of restriction. Does that make you feel any type of way?
I've definitely heard the way that the meat industry, dairy industry impacts climate change, increase in methane gas. It's made me change my buying habits a little bit. Like I'll try and at least buy from a local farm or something like that instead of going like the factory farm route. Yeah. That's about it.
Yeah, so you're like kind of aware of it, but like maybe not thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of where I am too, or maybe where I was going, I know that this is maybe not as good for the environment as eating a more plant-based diet, but how bad could it be? And then reading this research made me go, it can be pretty bad. So I wanted to talk about a little bit, I mentioned that rice is part of this equation, producing about 23%.
That's surprising to me.
I thought it was surprising too. So it turns out that rice is grown in rice paddies, which is like wetland type area.
Okay.
And so some methane is produced by bacteria in that water. But the researchers who were looking into this weren't recommending any changes to your diet in rice, partially because rice is just a staple food in so many parts of the world. It's not as much of a choice for someone to choose rice versus another thing. So that's not the people who we are primarily trying to focus on changing habits. And then also there are really viable ways to cut methane emissions coming out of rice paddies that are already starting to take place and can help reduce the impact there. So the researchers really recommended cutting, not entirely, but as much as you can, reducing meat and dairy, and particularly red meat. The methane coming from those industries is coming from gas that's built up in the animals. It's built up in cows, for example.
You're talking about cow farts?
Yeah, it's cow farts. That's what it is. Yeah, and burps.
And burps.
Yeah,
Can't forget the burps.
Yeah, I mean, really, it sounds funny when we talk about it, but it is this greenhouse gas that's like ruining our environment.
Wow,
and so there are ways that we can reduce the emissions just in the first place of how we treat these animals. So there are different livestock feeds that can reduce the amount of methane that comes out of those gas bubbles, whichever end they come out of. But really, it's also a consumer choice. When you hear this, are there things that you're thinking about as far as how you might adapt your diet or things you've tried in the past?
Yeah. I've actually gone vegan once before.
Yeah, how'd that go for you?
It was good. I had a lot more energy. I probably sustained being a vegan for like 3 months. But if you don't know how to do it right, you kind of are starting to get a little bit unhealthy. So I would definitely have to, I'm definitely not opposed to cutting down on meat again or going meatless. Something that when I did figure out about the impact of methane emissions from the food industry, I cut down a lot on red meat. I hardly eat red meat anymore. Every now and again, I might still get like a nice juicy burger. I'm guilty. But
and it's hard because we grow up that way, right? I mean, I said that I don't have any restrictions. I guess that's not entirely true in the sense that I have some self-imposed restrictions of when I eat certain things rather than what I eat. So I have no limits on what I will eat, but at home, I just don't cook meat.
Yeah.
That's
a great way to do it.
Yeah, it seemed like a really attainable goal. I think it was 2019 that I decided that I was going to stop cooking meat at home. I was inspired by a friend of mine who was vegan. I mean, she's probably been vegan for over a decade now. And she and I went on a vacation together to Mexico.
Yeah.
And before we left, I told her I was a little nervous because I didn't want to feel restricted when we were in Mexico on whether we could eat all these cultural foods, like really enjoy the trip, because I would have to be mindful of her vegan diet. And she goes, "Oh, I don't do that when I'm traveling." She just said, being vegan to me is a choice that I make for myself, but I don't want it to be something that restricts my ability to enjoy other cultures. And so when I travel, I'm not eating foods that have been factory farmed. I'm eating foods that have been grown locally. I'm eating to appreciate the culture. And she essentially just displayed this flexibility that it made me think, well, I could make some choices without feeling like, well, I have to be vegan or I have to be vegetarian. So I stopped cooking meat at home. And that way, when I want a burger, I just have that little extra barrier of, well, you're going to have to go get it.
Yeah.
If I really want it, I will. And maybe sometimes, maybe hopefully more often than not, that's enough for me to go, I don't really want to go out. I could probably make like a rice bowl with beans at home. And that would be something that's good for me and good for the planet.
Yeah. Am I getting an invite for any vegetarian dinners over at your place?
100%, Anton. This week I made the best dinner.
Let's hear it.
It was harissa butter beans.
Okay, butter beans.
Yeah, if I can find the video that I stole this recipe from, I will 100% share it, but it was on Instagram and not someone that I regularly follow, so who knows if I'll be able to find it again. But he was just showing that you could put butter beans in a pan with like garlic and onion and then some harissa paste, which was spicy and warm, and butter beans are like this really big, as the name might suggest, buttery, soft bean.
Delicious.
I dipped some sourdough in there. Oh, it was delightful, and it was a complete protein.
That's amazing.
Really filling and also really tasty. Every bit as tasty as like an equivalent meat dish for me.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've actually made a pasta recently. It was an egg noodle, so it's still vegetarian, not quite vegan, but yeah.
Oh, mine wasn't either. I mean, it had some heavy cream in there, but
Yeah.
every little bit helps.
Yeah.
So you handmade the pasta itself?
I handmade it. So my grandmother has a pasta maker. I actually found out very recently that she made egg noodles.
Amazing.
Some years ago, but I dug it out of her basement and just kneaded the dough, made it from hand. It was really good. So yeah, it was a fun, I guess, vegetarian dish.
I love that.
So I'm not feeling left out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you mentioned that when you tried to go vegan, some of the things that got in your way were just like not knowing how to do it right. And so I just want to put it out there that there is no right or wrong way to approach this. Any reduction is a good thing.
Yeah.
The researchers recommended keeping red meat to once per week, and that would keep us from from really surpassing these goals. That would make a huge impact. But you can also try things like just starting with a meat-free Monday. It doesn't even have to be vegan, but just not eating meat on Mondays. I have a whole cookbook on it that Paul McCartney wrote, the Meat-Free Monday cookbook.
Is he a vegetarian?
I guess so, or at least on Mondays he is. Or you can try things like what I'm doing and make it more setting. So eat whatever you want when you're going out with your friends so that socially you're enjoying your life, but then making certain choices for yourself when you're home. Ultimately, I would say just experiment with it and see what works for you.
Who knows? Maybe I'll be going vegetarian 8 days a week. We'll see.
8 days a week. Yeah. I like that Beatles reference.
Thank you. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go run to the grocery store and buy some butter beans. I think it'd be delicious.
It's going to be good. I'll send you the recipe when I find it. Well, Anton, thanks so much for talking all things green with me. Do you want to let our listeners and viewers know how they can keep up to date with us?
Yeah, absolutely. If you'd like to stay connected to us, be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at One Planet Media. That's ONE1. And if you'd like to rewatch full episodes, check out our YouTube channel, One Planet Media.
You can find all of our sources from today's episode in our show notes, which will also be posted on our website, oneplanetmedia.com.
Well, we'll be back at the same time this Thursday to bring you more news. Thank you for being a part of the global sustainability movement.